Charles Darwin is the godfather of modern evolution, but he wasn't the first to ask the question, where did all of these different life forms come from? You see, every human culture has sought for an explanation to the wide variety of life on our planet, from the ancient Greek creation myths to the Abrahamic idea of an omniscient creator to the various religions of Asia and Africa. I'm Dhruv. Welcome to the BioSapientia, and today we're going to be discussing early ideas of evolution. In ancient Greece, Anaximander had suggested that animals could transform from one kind into another. Empedocles had speculated that different species were made up of various combinations of pre existing parts. In ancient India, the idea of the 10 avatars of Lord Vishnu closely resembles the evolution of man from aquatic organisms. But closer to the modern idea of evolution were the proposals of the early church fathers, Gregory of Nazianzus and Augustine. They maintained that while not all species had been created by God, they had evolved later from God's creations. Their intention, however, was not at all scientific because they thought it would have been impossible for the ark to hold two representatives of every species, and thus some species must have come into existence later through evolution. The idea that organisms can change through natural processes was never really investigated by Christian theologians, but incidentally, it was considered a possibility by many. Saint Albertus Magnus and his student Saint Thomas Aquinas had concluded, after detailed discussion, that the idea of spontaneous generation, that is, organisms generating from inorganic matter, was completely compatible with the Christian philosophy. However, he left it to others to determine if such a thing was even possible. In the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, the Enlightenment was a movement of reason and progress. This, however, did not lead to the development of any sort of evolutionary theory, although there were many ideas that tried to explain. For example, Pierre Louis Moreau de Maupertuis
Pierre-Louis Moreau de Maupertuis
proposed the spontaneous generation of organisms in his theory of origins. However, he did not believe that species could change into one kind or another. Buffon, one of the greatest naturalists of the time, had explicitly considered and rejected the idea that species could change. He thought that species could in fact arise from organic molecules, and thus, for every possible organic molecule, there would be a species. The English physician Erasmus Darwin, in his book Zoonomia, had offered some evolutionary ideas, but they were never really developed and had no influence on subsequent theories. The Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus, who has developed the hierarchical system of plant and animal classification that we still use today in a modernized form, he insisted on the fixity of species. That is, he insisted that species could not change. The French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck held a view that was far ahead of his time. He believed that species would change and adapt depending on their habits. For example, the use of an organ would lead to its continuation, and the disuse of an organ would lead to its loss. This idea was later called Lamarckism, and although his theory was proven wrong in the 20th century, he, his work led to the acceptance of evolution more fully, and so he deserves some credit. Well, that's all. Thanks for listening to the BioSapientia. Today, we covered early developments of evolution before Charles Darwin. If you learned something new, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who you think will enjoy. Next week, we're going to discuss the life of Charles Darwin. St- Until then, stay curious. See ya.